These pictures. Who took these pictures?
Okay, trustees, we are live. We are recording. Phone lines are open. We are good to go.
Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Town of Trustees for July 25th, and I'd like to start with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
States of America,
United States of America,
for which it
to the
stands
republic,
one nation,
stands one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Allison, can you do roll call, please?
Certainly. John Aldred,
Here.
Francis Bach,
Here.
David Cataletto,
Here.
Ben Dollinger, Tim Garneau, Jim Grimes, Susan McGraw-Keeber,
Here.
Mike Martinson,
Here.
Bill Taylor.
Here.
Thank
Okay, so just so everybody is aware, what is the rule? What do we call it?
Yeah, so pursuant to our open meetings law and the resolution the trustees recently passed regarding the use of live video, we currently do not yet have a quorum of members present here live. As such, our video conferencing members are not yet able to participate until we have a live quorum, which may be happening shortly. And in addition to that, the trustees will not be able to vote on any official matters unless and until we do have a quorum present here live. So I think we're going to proceed with our meeting under the knowledge that we're not going to be voting unless and until we have a fifth member show up here live today, which we anticipate happening. And if it does not, we will not be voting on any trustee matters today.
Okay.
People, just one point of clarification, question of clarification. They can't participate in a discussion?
Cannot participate live unless we have the quorum present. And we're going to have a quorum present in about 30 seconds.
Jim is walking in the door.
So,
All right, we'll move on to public comment. We have Brad Lowen here to talk. Brad, can you come up to the podium?
A long time since I've been to a trustee meeting. It's good to see you. And what I have to say here, I'm saying as a, as a commercial fisherman, even though I'm getting too damn old to go fishing much anymore. And what I'm going to say is maybe not going to set too well with you guys. And I'm not trying to be critical, because as a matter of fact, I know all of you for the most part. Some of you I would call my friends. But I don't think you guys have been doing your job right in one respect. Let me get it straight. I'm not here to talk about driving on the beach or Georgia Pond or wind farms or so many of the other really difficult things that you're doing. I'm kind of here to talk about what's happening to your waters. And essentially they're dying. They're dead, as a matter of fact, in some respects, in some cases. I don't want to get into talking about fish stories about what the old days were like, but you are 350 years old, and you kind of based on, something 350 years ago. So I am going to talk about what you've lost just in the past few decades, actually. From a fishing point of view, you've lost a whole hell of a lot more than just scallops. You've lost just about everything that lives in your harbors and in your waters and in the bays. Um, I would suggest that you go down there and just inspect it for yourself. When it gets dark, when it gets dark and there's not much of a moon now, go down and just drive down to the edge of the water and in 3 Mile Harbor or Northwest or Bonnet Creek or wherever, and shine the light in the water with your headlights. Sit in the car, shine the lights in the water. 25 years ago, the whole water would just come alive. You'd have silver sides, sand eels, grass shrimp, and everything would just blow out of the water. It looked like raindrops, and there's nothing there. You used to be able to go down to the water when a night is dark. You could take sand and you could throw it into the water, and the whole thing would fire up with phosphorescence. Doesn't happen anymore. We used to go, you could go out on the flats in 3 Mile Harbor, where there's just a little bit of water. High tide, sunshine, in this time of year, you would see conchs, winkles, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, with the strings of their eggs, coming out of them. Horseshoe crabs are crawling all over the place. It doesn't happen anymore. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, there's only so much you can do, and I understand that. But one of the things that I think that you're doing wrong is you're putting too much faith in your expert's testimony. Now, I guess what I'm talking about specifically is his name Tettelbach? Is that the guy's name? Tettelbach, yes. Right, but he also, it seems to be saying, let's load up, all we have to do is get rid of nitrogen. And it hasn't happened. I mean, we've been trying to get rid of nitrogen for many, many years. It hasn't happened. As a matter of fact, it's kind of getting worse. It just isn't working, guys. It's not working. And I would suggest that you don't have to necessarily believe me. You just have to go out there and look with your own eyes. Maybe you might want to go down to some place like the Chesapeake, who have done oyster farming and all kinds of aquaculture to try to lower their nitrogen levels and clean up their waters for far longer than we have. And you don't have to talk to the experts. You just have to talk to somebody who's out there trying to make a living. There's plenty of oysters in cages, but you know what? In 40 years, there's no more oysters growing out in the bay, where there used to be so many, and they don't have crabs, and they don't have hard clams, and they don't have shrimp, and they don't have plankton. Maybe, go on a fact-finding tour, instead of paying him to tell you we're getting better and then losing more property because the DEC closes us down. Maybe you might want to go see something yourself. And then you have a better informed decision. Because what I'm worried about here is he's telling you we need more oysters, and on top of that, we need to put kelp in our harbors. Well, kelp seems pretty harmless, but you know what? We thought oysters were going to do it for us. And maybe kelp won't. Oysters have made it worse. Kelp may make it worse. And I'm just saying you need to have more input from real life than you do from the so-called experts. So I'm urging you to do that. You can go online and get all the scientific information you want about nitrogen. I mean, it's there for the taking, but you can't get information from the people who are actually on the water unless you actually talk to them. And they have opinions, and they're pretty well informed. So please do that. Thank you.
I have a question for you. Do you have any suggestions for us of what we could do?
I don't. I mean, I have nothing against a scientific expert until you find out that the expertise, the advice isn't working. So, doctor and he doesn't give you good advice, you have to go find another doctor. I'm fine with that. But it just seems to me to be obvious that the advice that you're getting might not be the proper advice, might be incorrect. And to find out what is happening, maybe, you should go and see it. And if you are asking for my opinion, I have looked online,
Excuse me one second. Sir, if you can go right back to the podium so we can hear you better. Thank you.
There is information online, and what it does is it tells you about the nitrogen cycle. It tells you what the oysters actually do within the nitrogen cycle. It tells you that they produce ammonia along with sequestering what small, tiny amount of nitrogen they take out of the water. The nitrogen cycle is very fast. It really is. But oysters and other shellfish too make ammonia, which is very toxic. And if you concentrate that ammonia, you could be toxifying the environment they're living in. And oysters also eat. And why not consider that maybe millions and millions of these things, in cages concentrated close together, eat everything, including themselves, including their own spawn. Do I know that for a fact? No, I don't. But it might be worth going and trying to find out something instead of just, with due respect, sitting in your chairs listening to an expert.
Well, actually, Brad, we don't just sit in our chairs and listen to experts. The last 6 or 8 years, we've been part of that program to monitor the horseshoe crab populations and stuff. And it's not all discouraging, but I'll tell you what is discouraging. Okay, it's very fortunate. Some of our baymen don't directly participate in that program, but when they grab a tagged horseshoe crab, they just let me know. Listen, I pulled this one out, this number out. But what's a killer is the number of incidental, what I describe commercial fishermen that are out here now that are operating under the heading of I'm a recreational fisherman. Okay, we've had Marine Patrol this spring down at Napeed 3 or 4 times where they round up half a dozen. They catch a half a dozen guys. They get down there, there's 11 or 12 of them. They're not collecting for conch or eel bait. They're down there loading these things up. They don't give a damn whether they're males, females, or whatever. They're loading them up. I don't know what they do with them, but they're gone. Okay? You get the same thing with the squid off the hanger dock. And I think some of the issues here, nitrogen's an issue. I have a hard time getting my head around nitrogen, frankly, because when I grew up, there was freaking duck farms from one end of the Peconic to the other. And you can't get much more nitrogen than what was coming out of those duck farms. Yet, we had robust scallop population. We had good clamming. We had all of that. But I think what it kind of comes down to everything.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people living along the water, more time on their properties, okay? The attitudes towards property management over the last 50 years has changed, okay? Years ago, those properties along Georgia Pond, they were big lawns. Those lawns went down to the water. Not every lot was developed. There was no irrigation on those properties, okay? Consequently, there was not a tremendous amount of fertilization, but if you went over onto the west side of Georgia Pond, hell, the farms and stuff over there, you're losing nitrogen into the pond and things managed fairly successfully. But I think we kind of reached that point, like so many other things, where it's a tipping point. Nitrogen in itself is not the enemy. The septic systems are not necessarily the enemy. The irrigation on those properties is not necessarily the enemy. But when you basically have the cumulative impacts of all of that, to include our own fishing community, we got to include ourselves in this, that the balance is off. Hey, Napeague Harbor, when was the last time that we had a good scallop set over there? John, you probably know, but it's been a while. And when you talk to like Cornell, what seems to be the biggest culprit, and I say seems to be because none of us are that friggin' expert, is water temperature. Well, Napeague doesn't exchange, the water in there doesn't exchange the same way it used to. And a lot of these harbors that we looked at naively, you included, looked at and said, well, these things are perfect, they've been producing for everybody. Well, you missed the point where they did the major county dredging projects back in the 40s and stuff, which created the environment. Take Lake Montauk, for example. It's a friggin' freshwater lake. That place was the best producer for scallops for years. Was that because it was such a great water body? Or a contributing fact there, it's a little like the first time you go to grow corn on land that hasn't been farmed before, you get bumper crops until you wear that land out a little bit. So I think you're right, Brad. We still all have a lot to learn in terms of our abilities to manage and steward the land, because it has changed a bit. What the trustees did back at the turn of the century, we can't do it that way anymore just because it's a different world out there. The population dynamic is different.
That's the whole thing. Back when there were a lot of duck ponds, there weren't a lot of people.
No, and
The people, you know.
And we've replaced the ducks.
I agree.
They were benefiting.
And I agree with you, Jimmy, and you know, and absolutely. I mean, you know, you can't walk on the beach 25 feet without running into somebody nowadays. I understand that, and I don't mean to sound that I'm scolding you guys. I'm really not. I mean, I have a lot of respect for you. I truly do. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, I mean, I don't know everything you did, and I'm not going to say that the fishermen are innocent of everything either. You know, I'm not that dumb. And wait a minute, Jim, and it's true. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that if you found something that doesn't work, and I don't think this oyster farming works, and looking at Hog Creek, it's not better, and looking at Three Mile Harbor, it's not better. I guess what I'm trying to say here is don't make it worse. Don't make it worse by putting in more oysters because somebody tells you that it's okay, and don't make it worse by putting in kelp until you actually know. And maybe instead of just listening to one person, I'm trying to put this all together to make my point. Instead of just listening to one person, actually listen to and go see people who've experienced this for a very long time. And as I said, you know, I mean, I know that down in the Chesapeake they have, you know, so it might absolutely. So what I'm trying to say is here, it's bad there, it's bad here. Trustees, don't make it worse by doing something you don't really know about completely. I guess that's what I'm really trying to say. I mean, I know it's never going to be like it was, ever. This place is supposed to turn into a water world here in another 30 years, you know, and then everything is going to change again, you know. So but what I'm trying to say is try not to make it worse. look for yourself and don't necessarily depend on the word of one man or one group.
There are lots of voices and, do what we do. I don't think we're basically looking at Steve Tailback or Chris Gobler or Cornell in general.
That's why I was thinking Mr. Goldberg.
And, taking direction from them. I mean,
So we are.
especially Chris is just basically evaluating what's there and trying to, give us a long-term look at the conditions in the harbors and how they may be changing.
And Brad, what we do find that you didn't have to deal with years ago is when we go to get permitting on some of these things, a very simple thing, like dredging out Little Northwest Creek. Okay. We can't just do that. We got to go through the process. We basically have to demonstrate through science that, one, the water body's challenged to create an argument to do the dredging. Some things that you and I looked at years ago and would have said, this is intuitive. We all know that it needs this. Well, we have to demonstrate that a little more carefully nowadays. And when you say, we do what Chris Goldberg tells us, well, we're hiring Chris Goldberg to monitor water, to evaluate the water quality, to monitor it when it's going bad, to have a better understanding. So when we go back to the DEC or we go back to the Army Corps, we can truly demonstrate through science that this is what we want to do. Because we can't, the days of us going to the DEC or going to anybody and saying, hey, I was thinking about this. I'd like to dig a big freaking hole over here. I think it'll be better for everything. We got to say how. How will that be better for everything? We've got to come through with that. And you know what? Nobody sitting at this table, unfortunately, truly has the credentials or the expertise to get anywhere. And you know better than all of us here how difficult it is sometimes dealing with government agencies and getting them to see it the way you see it.
Okay, I mean,
guys like Chris Gobler and that they are part of the tools in this world.
I guess what I'm trying to say, I hope they're not the tool.
It's not
Because to be honest with you, it really does kind of appear that way when it comes to the subject we're speaking to.
I mean, I know you're busy gallivanting around Pennsylvania and stuff. Okay, do you still vote out here?
Oh, yes, I vote, I'm a resident
You
here.
know what? We still listen to the baby, okay? I think there's a few of us here that are basically on individuals' hotline. And when they don't like what they see, nothing has changed on that respect. They're not shy about telling us exactly what they think. Might be 6 in the morning, or it might be 10 o'clock at night, but they just call.
Okay,
We still answer the phone.
okay, I hope you understand. As I said, I wasn't trying to scold you guys, and I said my piece, and I am a voter. I am still a resident.
Say anything about any other things, baby beach, trophy.
No. Yeah, you guys are doing what you're doing. Believe me, you know what? Once upon a time, I worked in government too, so I know a lot of the crap you got to go through, and I understand that part of it more than I wish. You should try. As I said, I'm trying to get rid of my license. I'm trying to pass my licenses on from the DEC, and the only way I can do that is if I die. So I'm not looking forward to that. Yeah, but then my licenses go back to DEC and they disappear somewhere. So I don't know. It's not good for the industry to have fewer people in it, I don't think. So I'd like to give them to somebody else. But in any case, thank you for hearing me. I hope you understand that what I said. I hope you understand that I wasn't trying to be hard on you guys. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Matt, do we have anybody on the phone waiting?
You have 0 callers. Thank you.
It's pretty lonely, that camera angle across the.
Okay, so we now have a quorum in the room, so Susan and Mike, you're free to participate. Move on to new business. Proposed changes to the town codes on beaches. Everybody get a copy of this?
I did not have a chance to look it over.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Did anybody get a chance to look at it?
Yes, I did.
I got that. What do our attorneys think of the language?
We have a comment.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I had a chance to review it, and the one kind of glaring omission that I noticed was, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I can pretty much point everybody to it. The definitions section, where it defines trustee beaches, it's on page 2 or 3, goes into a section C, which basically indicates those beaches which are not trustee-owned beaches. And it seemed to me it was pretty clear that that would be the perfect location to include the boundaries of Truck Beach, since this this decision was made. So I thought the town did a nice job with a lot of their language, but it's kind of a no-brainer to include under the omission section, section C on the trustee beaches definition, the boundaries of that beach, where we no longer, under the current decision, own that.
Yeah, Chris, given that this is obviously still in litigation, would there be some language along the lines of pending or something that would basically describe that?
I think we need to compare what the judge has handed down as his most recent decisions, and think about that in terms of what language is used. And I think that's a really good conversation topic with our special counsel.
I was hoping that they'd put the language of the reservation in the law.
That's a nice idea as well.
Yeah, that was one thought I had, mentioned the reservation, but I gave that comment back and it never came through, so I assume it was left out for a reason.
Well, I mean, because there are, there's sections in the code that define places that are privately owned. And they're all subject, this is a complex, our council and our special counsel would be happy with, I personally would like to see the language of the reservation in the town code.
But what I don't understand about that is that at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, the court has said there is no reservation at this point.
No, the court has said the reservation.
No?
They haven't articulated what the language.
We're still fighting about what it means.
Yeah, the court was basically silent on what the reservation meant. They didn't.
Well, they acknowledged the exact language.
Right.
They acknowledge that the reservation is there.
Landing of boats and tending.
No,
boats or whatever.
they acknowledge the reservation. Since the homeowners association keeps running around and using the first 10 words and forgetting the last 2 paragraphs. I believe the judge said that the reservation was valid. And where it is right now is interpreting that language to meet the current time, is something we kept. I mean, that's why we'll hire a counsel.
Chris?
Yes.
Can you explain the decisions to me? We won the first round, okay? We lost the second round and they recognized the reservation in the second court, correct?
The language of the reservation was recognized, yet as you guys are discussing right now, it really was never interpreted.
But in the second course, the reservation was specifically kept in place.
That's correct.
So we went to a third court who has failed to recognize that. And that's what we're working with now.
Correct.
So how can we put the reservation in here unless we all want to go
Well, I think that
for
could
the
be.
contempt charges
I would be
again?
afraid of it being interpreted as a form of contempt.
Absolutely.
As would I.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, I think we need to have this discussion with special counsel.
Okay. So can we hold comments on this until such time as we can flesh this out with?
I believe so. I don't know what the town's timeline is. They're going to discuss it when?
They're going to have a hearing on August 4th.
August 4th. Okay.
So that's what? Next Thursday?
Next Thursday.
Yeah, but they're only going to have a hearing. They're not going to, they don't have to vote on it. Right. Unless they plan to vote on it immediately after. You know,
Well, I mean,
but they still need our approval.
we have to approve it.
Right.
Who modified this?
Not attorneys. But I don't know if they got assistance from special counsel or
I believe they did.
not. Okay.
Can we get in touch with our special counsel for a meeting this week, or at least a teleconference?
We're going to have a meeting this week, but it's not finalized yet.
Okay.
You know, day?
That hasn't been finalized yet. I'm not available Thursday.
I'm not available Thursday. Friday, I'll be out of the country.
Okay, so it has to be Tuesday or Wednesday.
Well, actually, it has to be Tuesday, because Wednesday I got Boy Scout.
That's tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Yeah, that is tomorrow, yeah.
Talking about tomorrow or
Yeah, I'm available tomorrow.
texting right now?
I'm going to be gone in the morning.
Well, the next topic we're going to need to discuss with special counsel as well, so we do need to put a meeting together. Yeah, early next week we can meet.
Well, next week, this next week, right?
Next week's fine. The only thing for me is if you do something that's at like 7 o'clock at night.
You're out of the
mine,
country.
It's midnight.
Yeah, he's out.
You're in the pub by then, right?
Well, it's the intention,
Hey,
yes.
the report from Ukraine at 3 in the morning.
What's that?
They report from Ukraine at 3 in the morning.
Well, they do. It's different. That's only an hour difference.
Where are you going?
All right.
Basically, on the last round of council, like the reservation just got kind of decided, they like went down a side road and didn't really even discuss it.
So you said the reservation is valid, and, you know, the homeowners association said, well, that means no park. We're saying, wait a second, you know, it's the same thing as a wagon.
Yeah. I thought they were stressing more it was about ownership, but they can own the beach all day. It's about the reservation, not the ownership.
No, it's, I guess our position is we want to follow the deed,
Mhm.
you know? So now, you know, let's talking about this.
Yeah, right. Surprised they haven't held the fish in contempt yet for swimming past.
Whale washes up on the beach. Let's look at that.
All right, so we're gonna table that for a moment. Is there anything else in there that anyone has concerns about? The proposed law changes.
It's basically what's sort of there now, you know.
Did they change anything under the trustee beaches, or is that all?
No,
consistent?
basically, all they've done is they've scratched out anything that was just
Anything that just.
described as beach
Yeah.
is now
I mean,
described, is now referred to as trustee-owned or town-owned beaches.
Which precludes privately owned.
Correct.
But you could drive on a privately owned beach if you have their permission.
Yeah, we can't put that.
Or a reservation.
Well, I think that's a question, is if there is a reservation on a privately owned beach, who oversees that? I don't know.
Who's ever,
I don't know what the protocol is on people driving on the beach. I don't know how Marine Patrol can respond, I would think, to a charge of trespass. But as far as policing and stopping people before they get there, does a cop sit in front of your house to see if somebody turns around in your driveway?
I'm talking about, let's say things are sort of settled and agreed upon, and you've got a private beach with this reservation on it. Who enforces? Let's say the outcome is, yes, okay, they use wheeled carts, you use four-wheel drives. Yes, there's the ability to drive along a beach if you're fishing in the current day through this area of private beach, because the reservation is understood now to allow that. Who then enforces the beach trucks?
I think it would be based on.
it would be based on a complaint.
Right.
From the complainant.
Based on.
The way the thing is right now, if you're trespassing.
No, it would either be, hey, Bill, it would be no different than somebody, I'm gonna say, having a beach fire down there without a structure. We have.
Excuse me, wouldn't this be the responsibility of code enforcement?
It would be the responsibility right now of Marine Patrol. Code enforcement doesn't have the ability to come down onto the beach and enforce anything. So pretty much all code or, whether it be speeding or drunken driving on the beach is handled by Marine Patrol. And those things could be either generated out of a complaint or patrol and observance. Okay, and I would hope that the property owners would probably recognize the value of having Marine Patrol access this, now what they're calling private property, for the purpose of enforcement. Because if you don't, and now you're complaining that something's going on there, well, not for nothing. You have to recognize your participation in that.
Yeah. I've always had a problem with the fact that even if the tickets were issued, was to the best of my knowledge, nobody's ever determined that there was a trespass. Nobody's ever determined where the high water mark was.
Well, or where they were
the
driving.
vehicles were.
Yeah.
And the high water mark is an elevation, so it can change actually from day to day.
Well, listen, I think that rack line, anything that's below that's below. Well, the rack line moves to like right now, coming up on a new moon. The rack line's higher on the beach.
If the
angle of
a rack line could be up at the
Could be a few feet.
That's not gonna be.
No, my understanding is a mean high water line is an average over a period of time. Typically a 5 or 10 year period, not changing with the moons and the tides. And
There's an 18 and a 3/4 year cycle that determines.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be
high
able.
water is.
I don't think we're going to be able to determine that tonight.
No, this is what the Supreme, but, I still don't see how you can write somebody a ticket for trespassing if you know they're not, if you can't determine that they.
Well, if it wasn't truly observed,
Yeah. So I guess that's the court that's got to determine whether those tickets are valid or not. Has to make that determination.
That's a whole different kettle of fish.
Sometimes I'm a firm believer of the less you say, sometimes the better you are.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
That's it. We're going to move on to.
I think we should move on. So we have this resolution for indemnification of the trustees in response to the letter that we received from Mr. Patterson? Has everybody had a chance to read this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think we should take it up with our council.
Council wrote it.
Council wrote it, but I think that's something that we should comb through with our council, and have that exchange.
Yeah, I saw it as a nice starting point and first draft. I saw a number of items that we could use some clarification on. It's a great topic for when we have that meeting this week with special counsel to hash out any questions and concerns you guys have. We can take this offline to our meeting with our special counsel and make sure we're all comfortable with it. I don't think there's a real urgency to get this done tonight. I'd like to get it done the right way in the next couple of days.
Is everybody here available tomorrow at 5:30?
I can be, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Our special counsel is also available.
Well, there you go.
So can we plan on this? It'll be.
Great.
We can relay any information. If you have questions, you want to answer, you can. Yeah. Okay.
This is going to be a Zoom meeting.
It'll be a Zoom meeting.
Francis, did you say 5:30?
5:30 tomorrow. Yes.
Thank you.
Are you available?
I will be getting out of a pool at 5:30.
Okay, can you show me how to set it up? Thank you.
And this, Chris, do you feel like this indemnification, it's something that should have been in place a long time ago, potentially, right? Or better late than never.
We are named under town code as town employees in indemnification.
This is like belt and suspenders kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There is litigation. There's litigation.
Yeah.
State litigation.
Yeah.
As an elected body, it's good for us to have a policy in place, I think.
Well, clarification.
All right. With that. Old business. I don't have anything on the old business. Does anybody else?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Francis?
We don't have anything under old business. I'm offering if anybody else has.
Well, do we want to discuss that train dock application?
Is this a good place for it? Sure.
What are we going to discuss about it, I guess? Are there things
Well, I think we have to present what our discussion was to the board. So we'll start there.
Jim and Francis met with.
And Chris.
Okay.
And Chris.
I spoke to that.
Well, who wants to basically give the rest of the board the rundown?
Jim, you or I, we'll do it together.
Sure. We had set up a meeting with Mrs. Crane's counsel and Mrs. Crane last Thursday, really to discuss this thing. I mean, it's very clear that there was some structure there. It seemed like this float and catwalk over the years had evolved. When precisely it evolved to what we saw after it was rebuilt is not totally unclear, because we did go back through some past aerial photographs, and we could determine that this 4x10 floating platform had evolved into an 8x10 floating platform at some time in history. That when the property changed hands, that's what they had there.
We don't know when the 4x10
changed. No, we don't know when it changed. Okay, and we don't truly know, other than the rebuilding of that platform and the catwalk without permits. Well, what we did do is we had a very long discussion, which ended with Chris and I going down, and Francis and I going down and actually inspecting what's there today. Okay, what is there today is the aluminum catwalk from the shore to the fixed catwalk. And it's clear that that's not new. That was something that was recycled from the old project. You then have the fixed catwalk, which is roughly 2'8", yes, 2'8" by 24'6" in overall length.
Is the 2'8" from
Outside to
of
outside.
piling to outside of piling?
No, that's outside of your rails to outside of rails. To the outside of pilings, you have two 4x4 pilings, which roughly adds another 8 inches. Yes. So that's 3'4". Okay. So this thing falls under the heading of what typically you would permit. All right. No, in terms of width of these walkways and stuff, because I do beach walks all the time. And you know what happens when you do a beach walk? The permit may read a 4 by 24 foot set of stairs down to the beach with flow through decking. That's what the town likes to see now. Well, flow through decking comes in 2 sizes. It comes in a 36-inch size and it comes in a 48-inch size. If you use the 48-inch size, guess what's that?
You cut it in
You
half.
cannot cut it in half
Because
because,
it's fiberglass?
well, it's plastic, and what it is, it's that rolled rail that gives the structural integrity. So if you try and cut it, which basically you're doing, is you're totally wrecking the structural or the bearing quality of it. So, okay, so if you buy the 4-foot ones, well, guess what? Just what you mentioned, when you add your posts and stuff, now you're outside of your permit. So we're forced to always get the 3-foot ones and end up with a walkway that's a little smaller than what was in the permit. But in any case, if I can go back to what's there, we've got 4 sections of this 2'8" by roughly 8 feet. There's a few inches added to each one of these things, which,
I only saw 3 sections.
no, there's actually 4 sections. Or excuse me, 3 sections, you're right. I'm sorry, three, I'm misreading. I'm looking at my 3 8-foot, roughly 8-foot sections. The aluminum portion, which is the structural element here, is, you can tell that was old and reused. So that was there. And there's a photograph in there of sort of the mechanics of this. It's actually made to be lifted and removed. So the post went from 2-inch metal pipe to 4x4 green heart, it appears, with a 2x6-inch cedar cross member. We looked at it, and I'm going to be honest, I'm satisfied. This is what has been there for a good while.
Except it hasn't been fixed until it was built like this last year or whenever it started.
Well, they replaced the boards in these stringers, and they removed the pipes and replaced them with 4x4 green heart.
I guess what my point is, this whole structure in the past was taken out and stored.
Yes. And through our discussion on Thursday, the applicant agreed to put the float part back to 40 square feet, but not a 4x10 configuration, but the gross square footage to be about 40 square feet. Keep her 3 sections of fixed catwalk. The gangway that went down to the float, we measured the old bits and pieces were there. It was exactly 8 foot long, and again 2'8" wide, that led out to the float with a set of rollers on it.
So the permits are okay? She has them all lined up, or she?
No,
she hasn't-
no, she never got any permits. This was our,
Get them? Right.
this was our feeling as a way of resolving this for the trustees and only the trustees is to,
Could I just say one thing first? Just so you know, the previous dock had absolutely no permits whatsoever. So it doesn't have natural resources, DEC, none of it. So as far as they're concerned, it did not exist.
The only permit actually
Was for the float.
is for a 4x10 float in the water.
Okay, so.
Okay, and that's still the
That's
case.
what I understood, so I was like, hey, we're,
So bring up, see,
okay, so here's the thing, guys. We collected for the last 35 years, we collected a fee each and every year for this floating dock and whatever, okay? And part of that permit is to get down and inspect.
Not necessarily.
Well, not necessarily, but you know what?
but there was a time when it was called an inspection fee.
Yeah,
Before this board was here, it was called an inspection fee. It's, go back and look. Did you look at any of them? Am I correct?
Yeah, correct.
I'm absolutely.
you know, I can't help but to recognize our culpability here. And there is a point where something exists uncontested for a given amount of time. It's hard to define. What we came to, and it would have to be agreeable to the rest of this board, is to permit what is there with the change of bringing this back to a 40 square foot platform from the 80 square foot one that we saw in aerial photographs, and I think Francis witnessed a year or so ago, conditional on any of the same conditions we would put on any other permit, that they are required to get both town NRSP, DEC. They would need a town NRSP to get a building permit. And
One thing that I think is a little unclear to me here is that it is where our jurisdiction ends, where the town's jurisdiction begins, and vice versa. Because I see this structure as partially in both jurisdictions.
well, I see it primarily, if you get Danny and John, and when you look at this thing, it looks like it is entirely in our jurisdiction until you get to the aluminum gangway that connects from the fixed fixed catwalk to the shoreline. And it's clear that that gangway that goes to the shoreline, I can't see that shoreline being our property or our jurisdiction.
One of the
So
jurisdictions.
it's in both jurisdictions.
But it is primarily in our jurisdiction, like many docks.
And one way to navigate this jurisdictional concern of ours is to do what the trustees have always done, as Jim mentioned, which is to require the permitting from the town, whether it's natural resources or any other type of permitting from the town. And in the meantime, we do have communications reached out to their attorney's office and others at the town. So we could probably spend 2 hours debating the jurisdictional line there. But at the end of the day, I think one way to, again, navigate that concern is by doing our typical permitting, which requires the permits from all the other municipalities. But I think what John and Jim are both saying is correct. There's a line there. It's potentially ambulatory, and it's potentially in both jurisdictions.
I think parts of it are in each. I think since we've been collecting fees for a floating dock that's been there forever, what we're doing now is just giving them permits to the floating dock.
That's all we've ever done.
Yeah.
We've given them, we charge for 10 feet, times $4 or whatever. We've never charged for this structure.
because they didn't do their inspection.
We have a documented inspection at some point throughout history.
I mean, that's the
It's
reason why.
questionable. You know, they signed off. We can't, can I tell you, the fact that we accepted it, we cashed the checks. Each and every year, we cash the checks.
So it's on us.
So I don't know how you, allegedly, we did inspect it.
That's what I remember a long time ago, I suggested that they change the word inspection fee to administration fee.
Well, since we've been on this board, it's been
It's
all
been
the
fine
dock
like
fee.
that.
Yeah.
So what's the town's culpability? I mean, you're saying basically we're
Well-
culpable here because we didn't look at it and say something. What's the town's culpability?
Town's gonna bite at the apple here. The town has to.
The town planning department has given an opinion on this. Basically said,
I haven't seen a written opinion anywhere.
yeah,
You've seen a written opinion? Yeah.
Exactly, it's right here.
is that the Joanne Powell letter? Is that the Joanne Powell letter?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And to me, I read that letter and it describes a reserve area. And I think they speak to the fact that they can't administer a fast track permit on this. That's how it starts.
That was applied for evidently.
And it ends with, we're not sure we can give a permit for something that lands that's in a reserve area, which, yeah, because towards the bottom.
I didn't read it as we're not sure if we can. I read it as we can't give a permit.
Well,
There's no mechanism for giving a permit.
well, that's not entirely true, John,
Well,
because,
I'm just saying what it
you know, Joanne made this comment, but you know, each reserve area typically has language attached to the adoption of that resolution for the reserve area, which sort of describes the metes and bounds of what you can do in there. And I'm going to use, for an example, Culloden in Montauk. When that subdivision was done, each and every waterfront property has the right to a path to the water. Okay, so, and we watch these things get issued all the time. Over in what do you call it? These beach stairs and stuff that are allowed. I'm going to use another example, Beach Plum Park on that peak stretch. Okay. The property owners, as part of the resolution for the reserve area for that subdivision, the homeowners, and the town encourages these over what the DEC wants, the homeowners are allowed to do what's described as a rollout walkway over the dune, not to exceed 4 feet.
So the types of cases that you're describing, Jim, when interpreted in light of the case in front of us right now, would likely, I'm just thinking from a practical matter, how this plays out. A, it plays out in a negotiation with the planning board, the natural resource department, and the attorney's office, or B, it gets negotiated or litigated.
Well, it's kind of like the ZBA or
But
something.
it's not negotiated, it's neither negotiated nor it is litigated by the East Hampton Town trustees, because
Correct.
we are not the ones crossing this reserve area. And it seemed like there may be a significant hole in this reserve area in that, I don't know what the language is of that. When they did that subdivision over there, is it written into that reserve that the adjacent or connecting properties, waterfront properties, have a right to cross over that reserve?
Well, that you got to define crossover. I mean,
Well, no, it's typically the language, if it's there, is a 4-foot wide footpath or something of that nature.
Or an easement.
But doesn't the path end at a beach, not a body of water? in those circumstances.
Well, not always. We don't have a beach here.
Well, here we
Excuse me, is the letter from Joanne in the binder that we have been distributing?
No, it was not. Actually, I got that from Chris earlier today.
Okay, is it possible for all of us to have that letter?
Yes.
Well, I didn't know exactly where it came from, but
Well, it came to the office.
You took it out of the binder, so
I have all of,
CC'd to us.
I have everything.
That all sounds like, you know.
I'm sorry, Allison, you said you have it?
Everything's saved, yes, it can be sent.
But the
Right.
bottom
Thank
line is the discussions that were had with counsel for Cindy Crane and the three of us ended in their counsel, Rick Whalen's tentative agreement that if we were to grant a conditional permit, conditioned upon receiving approvals and permits from these other municipalities, that would be something that they'd be amenable to. And that these types of questions we're asking now are questions that need to be answered between Rick Whalen and the town of East Hampton, and not the trustees.
I mean, what do you
Right, Jim?
think about us discussing this with the town before we sort of go our separate ways on decision making? I mean, does that make any sense or not make any sense? To me, it's,
I think we gotta deal
hear
with.
what they have to say.
well, I think the position over the last several years that the ZBA has taken in that anything that is significantly or entirely in trustee ownership or jurisdiction, that the trustees would take lead on it. In this circumstance here, the renewal of this application, we would indeed be taking lead on it. Now, it does not mean that the ZBA will agree with us. And you know what? It does, to me, it really makes no difference.
Well, I'm not so sure I agree that the ZBA is looking for us to take, has traditionally looked for us to take lead.
They have not. No, they have.
Going back and forth.
John, they traditionally have not. And on many cases, we've seen the ZBA actually petition the DEC for them to take lead. It was the ZBA's most recent counsel that took that position, that the ZBA over this past many years may have been operating to some degree in error, okay? Because what they were doing to a certain degree, and we allowed it, was they were usurping our authority on projects by demanding to be the lead agency, and we acquiesced to that on many cases. I think the decision that was made for us to be lead on some of these things was probably appropriate.
We did that when we came. There was times they weren't even notifying us.
Yeah, and I think this comes a long way. I think that, we act here responsibly. There's an opportunity to put this matter to rest for the trustees and move on.
If we went that route, all we're approving here is what's in the water, basically. And it's not the whole structure.
No, the only thing that is not in the water on this thing is the landward end of the gangway that connects to the shoreline, because as you can see, we were down there roughly high tide.
it's the wheels.
And everything was in the water, with the exception of the last 4 foot or so was overhanging onto, I wouldn't describe it as dry ground, but uninundated
I'm
ground.
not so sure I'd say that just because it's on the catwalk, and it's only touching on the wheels, that the whole thing doesn't, sit basically on the marsh. I mean, it covers the marsh.
But there was
Does it
water
say
under,
damage
there was
to the
water
marsh?
under that.
Marsh that the gangway's sitting right on the marsh does.
Okay, the only point I'm gonna make here, John, this friggin' thing's been in this for years. And the smart title seems robust. The shoreline seems intact. And I think if we had a float that somebody was basically sloshing down the face of that mud bank to get to, I don't think that shoreline would be in as good a shape.
I don't disagree with
So that was one of the reasons I went in the direction. Well, my feeling is, if you're asking my opinion would be a permit decision.
I mean, I guess my concern, my main concern, and I spoke to Chris about this today, is the precedent that this could set for other illegal structures that we will potentially find in our.
I would say that does not set precedent. What sets precedent are legal determinations. Okay, so in the event of litigation, okay, if this is litigated and the applicant is successful, or whether we're successful, that's precedent. Okay, anything that's negotiated is not really a precedent-setting thing. It's when that decision is challenged, and a legal determination is made. That's what sets precedent. I'm not a lawyer, Chris. Yeah,
we've had that conversation, John, and also relates back to a lot of some individual trustees' concerns on the McGindock application. There's this sort of concern by a number of the trustees about precedent setting, and a negotiated case-by-case decision is not precedential. What's precedential, as Jim mentioned, is a decision handed down by the court that becomes case law.
Well, I grant it in a technical sense. I'm sure you're right. But we approved one of these stairways to a floating platform that's not a dock in Georgia because the guy next door had one. We approved it because because the trustees had acted, and we saw that as a precedent. There was no litigation involved in that.
Okay, but you know what? In that case, there, it's the reasoning behind the issuance of the permit, and in that case, the reasoning behind the issuance of that permit was an erodible bluff going down to Georgia, and we recognize that every property owner along Georgia has the right to access the water. And in that area, there's a bit of a bluff for people that need to get down to the water. Now, we never got applications on it, but we listened to some overtures about a property that was a bit to the north of those properties that was basically looking to do the same thing. The only problem is, hey guys, you don't have the profile that dictated that style of things. So, when we're talking about precedents, there's an element of practicality here. Form follows function in design. We don't just willy-nilly add like a boardwalk or something there. You have to look at sort of the practical need for it. If this were a case where, let's say there was a beach, then you mentioned, a walkway or a trail leading down to a beach. Well, really wouldn't make any darn sense to have the beach and then step up on a boardwalk and walk over a gradual bottom to get to your platform. It doesn't make sense in that case. So,
doesn't this applicant have the right to access that body of water?
The riparian right, yeah.
Well, except that she doesn't
own.
It doesn't be adjacent.
I'd like to go back to the just the basic core issue here of Crane's dock. My understanding from what I'm listening to is that there was a meeting with Mr. Whalen and the applicant or the homeowner and with our trustees, correct? Is that correct? And with our council?
Correct.
And the end result of that meeting, there seems to be, and I heard that there was something that would be agreeable to both homeowner and to the trustees. Is that incorrect?
Well, we're deciding whether it's agreeable to the trustees.
Okay, so my next question is, my next question to you is, so I can understand this better, and also the public or whomever, who's listening, what was that, what was the end of the meeting and the result of that meeting in terms of what we're discussing? What actually are we coming around to that I'm hearing that we go through the permit process as we normally would for the dock permit, meaning the Department of Natural Resources, the ZBA, the town, which I think John mentioned the town and the trustees. I think that it's a good idea that we talk together about this. But that aside, is that the question, whether or not we start from that a starting point, or that we are, what is our, I'm trying to grasp.
If you would allow me.
I know what the issues are, but
No.
I'm trying to understand the meeting that you had.
She can't hear you very well.
Susan, if you would allow me, this is what sort of the conditional permit that we came down to, that we were going to bring back to the board tonight. The trustees would permit the float reconfigured to be no more than 40 square feet. The gangway from the float to the fixed catwalk would be 2'8" by 8 feet in length, okay, which is what was pre-existing there. The catwalk, the fixed catwalk constructed of an aluminum frame, pre-existing, by the way, with 5/4 by 6 number 2 cedar deck boards set parallel with the sections of this. The posts were going to be switched, which they've already been switched, to 4x4 inch green heart piling with a 2x6 inch cedar cross member, 3 removable section, overall length not to exceed 2 foot 8 foot width by 24 foot 6 inches in length. The gangway, which would connect from the fixed catwalk to the marsh, would be 2'8" in width and no more than 16 feet in length. That's what you see in the photograph there. All components, with the exception of the green heart post, shall be removed at the end of the season, as they had been in the past. And the permit shall be conditioned that the owner would be required to show proof of both DEC and town NRSP and town of East Hampton building permits before our permit would be valid, which is a condition that we pretty much put on every permit that we issue, because we do not have the power to issue a building permit. And very frequently, there's overlapping jurisdictions, which we would have here, which would involve the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the town of East Hampton.
Okay, so thank you very much for that explanation. And all of the measurements and so forth, you said there was a picture, which I'm not seeing on my screen. I don't know if Mike is or not. But
It's not on the screen.
how does this differ from what is currently there?
Well, what's currently there is that.
And I have seen it, by the way, and I've taken pictures.
How is it different from what was there?
No, she said, how is it different from what is there?
It is nothing. It is not different. Other than the 8x10 floating platform, which was removed.
And filings.
Okay, so the 8x10 platform, which used to be 4x8, now would be diminished back to the normal size that it was originally permitted for?
Yes, it would not be 4x10 foot, but it would not.
No, be 4x8, which is the original.
No, the original was 4x10. What they're agreeing to the same square footage, but they would rather configure it more in a square than a long, narrow rectangle.
Okay.
I have one question on that detailed description of what we would conditionally permit? Why are we permitting the ramp when we're not considering it landing on, when we're considering it landing on town property? Or not considering it on trustee
I
property?
don't know, why do we issue a permit or do renewals on docks, John?
Or stairs that only touch trustee property when they get to the bottom.
Man,
We don't define the staircase all the way up the bluff to the guy's lawn, though. We talk about this.
but we do
giving a
define,
permit
but we
for
do
the
define
staircase.
docks to the shore.
Then why include that in a description?
John, at the other end does connect to the dock area, which is still in our jurisdiction. So part of that ramp is in our jurisdiction.
And
Are we discussing this, are we discussing still the homeowner going through the process that anyone else normally would?
yes,
Okay,
I have another point I'd like to make is, to my knowledge, the only application we have for this currently was given to us in June this year, during which we have a moratorium on it. Is that?
this was a renewal. This was not an application, this was a renewal.
Renewal of what?
Renewal of the permit for what was there.
Float, it was only renewal for the float.
right, it wasn't for the entire dock
They've made.
and and structure as it is now. It was only for the original, if I understand that correctly. Is that right, John?
I'm sorry, Susan, I was talking, mumbling when you were,
All right, I'll rephrase it again. The original application was only for the original dock. So now, if you're saying that the application provided in June was for what is existing now, that would not be so, because the original application was only for the dock that was 4x8, correct?
4x10.
4x10, thank you, Jim. So I'm feeling that the process is important here, especially since we have a moratorium, to go through with all the departments so that it becomes a legal structure. I'm sorry, it's very hard for me to talk, so I'm going to mute myself and continue listening.
I find it hard to include this in a moratorium when it pre-existed the moratorium.
But not only that, we've been discussing this with the applicant for almost 2 years now.
Yeah,
What's the moratoriums on all new docks?
they apply. Why did they make this
I don't know.
application?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's, you know,
No, I don't know.
well,
But John, anything we find from this point on they have not contacted us at all. We've been in discussion. If you're in discussion with an applicant, you cannot include them in the moratorium.
This is like pre-existing.
Now, they put in for an application for the float, but this is the part that we've been discussing.
my understanding, and I may be wrong about this, my understanding was we've been holding off on issuing them their regular annual dock permit for the last year or two because of these ongoing discussions.
Right.
Now, deep into those discussions, and they made application. So there must have been some, understanding that, well, make application for this thing.
Yeah, there's all kinds of, we have.
And what I'm hearing is, well, because we've been in discussion, that in fact kind of is an application. I don't know.
To me, it kind of is.
Well, I think to me, the question from this would begin from the very beginning. Yes, in 1984, somebody applied for a 4x10 foot floating dock. Okay. And somewhere along the line, this thing evolved. it became what it is today? Nobody. To my knowledge, no other trustee board challenged that. No enforcement challenged that.
No, code enforcement has this as a case. Where's that Joanne Powell? I mean, it's not on there, but I believe that code enforcement was notified of this.
I'm the one who notified them.
Oh, recently or years?
No,
Years ago.
And I don't believe that the people were served with anything.
No, I don't believe they were, probably because of that.
Well, that, again, I mean, I think talking about this with the town is not going to be the end of the world here in our understanding.
But we're separate boards. We're supposed to make our decisions based on the information we have. At what point, talking to the other board, does it start to look like collusion?
Yeah. The town's gonna do what the town's gonna do. When we go through, when we go out and measure all these docks, we are gonna get hit with,
We're gonna, hey,
a lot
this
of
is,
stuff, and we're gonna have
guys,
to
this
sit
is not
down
gonna be
and-
the only one of these discussions
We're gonna have
that
to
we're going to have.
We're gonna have to decide what's best in each individual case. I mean, it's gonna,
Again, too, I know, I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Either.
I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just very uncomfortable with it.
Anything we find at this point on, we're searching for it. Okay? We have the moratorium in place for that. Nobody has come to us for a permit on any of these docks that we find that are unpermitted. They have been talking to us for 2 years about this. It's very different.
Don't we want to set, as you say, Chris, a precedent that this is the process by which all applicants should go through? This board, don't we want to be the board that says you have to follow the rules?
Well, that's what we're attempting
Yeah,
to
that's
do,
what
is
I think
bring
that's
it
what we're
into
doing.
compliance.
And I think you guys can fair
But
compromise that all parties agree on to do so.
Well,
To go through the
not all
process.
parties.
Or we didn't.
Not all parties.
But we've come up with something.
But following the rules means going through the actual process, and it's, and here we have someone that wants to have a dock that has really one permit only. And it was for something entirely different. So I'm asking, if we're gonna do it the right way, why not start doing it the right way?
Well, Susan, how do you penalize somebody that didn't originally build this thing? And I'm not sure that the owner before Cindy Crane actually built this thing. This may have been actually constructed by an owner several owners back. Okay, but at no point during that time did anybody question that structure. Not only didn't we question it, we quite merrily cashed the checks for it. I would prefer personally.
I don't agree with that. We didn't cash the checks for this. We cashed the checks for 10 foot of dock.
Yeah.
10 foot, that's it.
Yeah, we did. And none of us got off our asses and we did and found out that there's 24 foot of dock there.
Right.
I don't agree with that either. I mean, this was on my marsh walk. I saw this. I talked to Mike Delalio from the planning department about it. Francis saw it being rebuilt. Francis turned
This is,
it in.
yeah, but
I mean,
before.
they were like, what's this? Why
But
is this
before
here?
it was
There were
rebuilt.
discussions, and this
But before they started to rebuild this, it was there.
Yeah, I know. And it was, and there were discussions with the planning department of, is this thing permitted? What is?
No,
it?
before
What's the story?
before this thing, before the new owner, before what triggered this whole thing was the reconstruction of this thing. It wasn't its existence.
Right.
Okay, so on your marsh walk, you never saw anything wrong here.
there was a question which I discussed with a planner. I didn't go back to the office and like hit the books
Hey,
and
listen, man, I
go
would,
on investigation immediately. No, I'm guilty. Grant,
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what's been going on for 30 years. Everybody's seen it, people ignored it.
Again, we've met with Rick and Cindy. We've come up with a potential solution that some trustees might agree to and some might not. John, you and I spoke about it today on the phone. I guess if you're uncomfortable with it, John, can you walk us through the alternative of denying this and where that leads us? And what ultimately, as a trustee, how you see this going and whether or not you agree that maybe there should be some form of structure or dock there.
I probably can't do that. I'm probably not that aware of the potential consequences, although we talked about it, and I take your word for it. I'm sure they could be severe. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not sure what to do.
Well, may I ask you again, what is the unofficial agreement that Rick and Cindy and the trustees felt comfortable with at the end of the meeting?
well, this is what we,
No, wait, please, Jim, it's so very hard for me to talk. So let me just finish because I'm almost done. Tonight, the board feeling that we should approve what is currently there? Is that how the meeting went, where everybody kind of said, well, we'll bring it to the board, but we think that we could work this out and we'll give you the permit that is necessary for what is there currently? Is that the end of the meeting, essentially? Because Chris just asked John why he would be opposed and what would be his reasoning.
just trying to answer a question.
Yeah, that's the solution. But again, there wasn't a decided upon. It's just something for the trustees to decide upon as a group. That is the solution, yes.
One
And
thing,
that is, okay, to approve what's there. All right,
Conditionally approve what's there.
okay.
I mean, Chris does have an outstanding meeting or discussion with John Jelnicki that I think, I don't think this is a vote tonight kind of a thing.
I don't think.
Well, I don't think you can keep tabling something forever either.
No, but we're just putting this in front of them, I think.
Okay.
I don't think it's unfair to allow them to chew on it until the next meeting.
We're going to be forced to vote on many things that we're uncomfortable about. But that's what we're elected to do, was have an opinion. We may not all.
I guess, to Susan's point of process, and I think what she was talking about is process. I mean, people make an application to us, we consider, we vote. What is, are we voting on this application or are we voting on 2 years of informal discussion? And just to clean up on old business.
I think it was 2 years of discussion and the application with the goal of cleaning up this old business.
And
But I also think that we've been discussing,
Cleaning up our end of it is what we're looking
we have been discussing how this came to be and how much of how the trustees have responsibility or not with regard to the salt marsh. Did we own that part? Did we not own the part? So there are a lot of different factions here, but to conditionally approve, Chris, that means that they would go through the process of applying to the ZBA and to the town to do it the way normally they would have to do it, or no?
Yes,
Conditionally is meaning upon condition.
correct.
And the Ds, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Relevant agents.
And that's a process right there.
and DEC, so that would take this particular applicant through the process as all applicants would have to go through if they were applying for a dock? Am I
In the
correct?
event, yes, and in the event they were unable to procure those permits, then our conditional approval would be invalidated.
Okay,
In which case,
Conditional approval doesn't become official until they get the permits, right?
okay. In the interim, would that dock remain as is until a decision is made? Or would the applicant have to remove that dock pending approvals?
the dock would remain as is, the way it is, pending approvals. The condition does not require her to remove it now and then attempt to permit it.
Okay, so it would remain as until the approval, okay?
Correct.
I mean, if they made them take that dock out when they were trying to get to the floating dock, they're gonna do a lot more damage walking back and forth in the marshes. It's gonna make
That
it
was,
worse.
that was ultimately the conclusion, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the first rule in navigation, you gotta go from where you are. And so, I think we're trying to clean up a mess there. And I don't think it's the first mess. Once we start doing-
I think that since this is now come to a tighter response and a tighter ending, that we should have a couple until our next meeting at least to talk amongst ourselves to decide how we wish to move forward and vote. But I'd like some time personally to mull this over.
I have a question. The suggestion here is to approve this thing as is, basically. But you know as well as I do that, you know, this kind of a platform is not going to be acceptable to anybody else. I mean, they're going to want a grate. They're going to want grading.
And that's why, that's good, John. Well, you know, here's the dilemma I find myself in. This is what was there, essentially. Yes, it's new wood, but if you look at the configuration of those boards, they fit into the frame probably the same way the other boards did. And we do a lot of that flow-through type decking material, which allows light to penetrate. But oddly enough, I was looking at this when we were there the other day, and I took a whole bunch of pictures. The marsh, even under the fixed portions, seemed to be pretty robust and healthy. So listen, through the process, the different agencies, both DEC and town, may require some modifications to what is there. That will not be up to us. But those modifications will have to come back to us, and we'll, you know, sure that whatever is ultimately approved, we should modify our permit to align with DEC, to align with the town. Because in the past,
So I'm not sure so are you saying that we believe this is allowing enough light for?
it seemed to be, I'm going to be honest with you.
There's no evidence that it's detrimental to the
You know,
marsh.
if this was like a way of like saying whether that makes any sense or not, you look at this and you go, geez, you know, does it make sense? And why is all this stuff still doing pretty good?
It's not, could be low. I mean, it could be, hasn't been there that long.
Well, the other dock was put in the same spot seasonally for years. And when you look at the old aerials, it seems to be in the identical spot that it has been.
When the dock was recently improved or repaired, shouldn't the owner have come forward to apply for a renovation or repair to the trustees?
Actually, yes, they should have come to us. They should have come to the town. They should have come to the DEC. We're not denying that. But this is not the first nor will it be the last property.
Well, I'm talking only about a specific case, not other people that we may encounter with non-permitted docks or renovations that have become enlarged. I'm just asking about this particular one since that's what we're focused on. And it seems to me that if you are aware that you need a permit to do these things, then you need to apply for those permits. And that's another thing, that we want people to follow the rules and go through the process.
But see, we also don't know if the work was done by this applicant or the previous
No, it
owner.
was done by this applicant. No, they've acknowledged that.
I'm sorry, it was done by the previous owner, the improvement?
I don't know if you call it reconstruction, repairs, whatever,
So it was not done by the current owner?
Oh, it was.
It was. Well, that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, because I believe that owner knew that permits were required. Did they not?
Well, I don't know that the owner knew, but I'm sure that the contractor they used was aware of that.
Okay, but it always falls back on the owner, as we know. They are always responsible for whatever work is done, regardless of the contractor. So, I know through real estate as a broker, I run into this all the time. And, people are made to take things out that they do not have a permit for, or to resolve something that can be amenable, but still that the owner is aware and now, has respect for the rules. And I think that's my issue.
But Susan, as a real estate agent, and over the
Broker, I'm an associate broker, different from agent there.
Tomato. Okay, over the years, you saw probably many times that things had been done that had pre-existed for years but were rebuilt with no permits when they should have gotten. And you probably also knew that it was a rarity that there was a precedent to deny that structure, because typically those things are what generates litigation. And typically, courts frequently find in the favor of the property owner in that case, because it does fall on, in this case, the trustees to have basically established what was truly legal or not there. And there is a point where if something's been there uncontested, and in this case, we don't know. It's not since 1984, but it's been longer than probably 1990s or 2000. And we never questioned it as a board. We weren't on the board then, but we still represent that old board. And listen, you finally have to get some resolution of this. And when you take one of those punitive actions of saying, well, you didn't get your permits and we're going to deny you from that, that typically tees up a situation that pretty much guarantees that the litigant will be successful.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we don't work together, which is what you've done since we last met. But I'm suggesting that we don't want to incur the same situations going forward and always allowing something to exist when clearly a permit is required. If we don't set our rules up and stick by them, we are going to end up with constantly, and I will go back to my being an associate broker. I've seen many things taken away from a property because the person did not apply properly. So I've seen that happen, and it's been in major properties, but that is single and separate from this particular issue. I would like to see this resolved in a workable way that protects the trustees from further applications or non-applications, so that we can say there is a process here that must be abided by, and be firm with that, because that's why we are here, to preserve and protect.
Susan, that was the whole point of the dock and bulkhead inventory. It was just so that we could establish what's truly out there.
Right, I know, and I think it's great, and I'm very excited about it.
And also be able to go back and recognize some of those ones that I'm gonna call a little like this, that were quasi permanent, that something was permanent that ultimately evolved into something else. Now, if this was a case, I would agree with you 100%. If this was a case where you had a new owner, she demoed the dock and replaced it with a 6 by 30 foot dock that was completely different from what they had, I'd say, well, to me, there's no explanation for that. You got to remove that. The only way to go back is to go back to what you had. But when we actually got into this, it was evident that what was on that property that predated this property owner, yes, it's new wood, it's the old aluminum frame. I don't know when that dates to, but when you're looking at the aerials, it seemed like it was there for many years. Now, the reality here, Susan, is this dock apparently has been rebuilt several times. All of them done. They've had to, I'll tell you one thing right now.
Well, I'm going to go out on a branch here and say your lawyer is responsible for making sure that you have permits for the property and all its accessory buildings and accessory docks, tennis courts, whatever it may be. That's your attorney's job, to make sure that everything there has been permitted properly.
Susan, the one thing I see unique, possibly unique, let me say, about this case, I mean, we're going to find, we may find other illegalities, but I don't say we won't find this, but in this case, there is this question of, basically the dock that's permitted is in effect afloat, and the question of walking over the marsh to get to the dock is an issue for the marsh itself. I mean, if it wasn't permits and legalities and, who's supposed to do what, when, I don't think anybody's disagrees that the issue of traversing the marsh is an issue, and what's better, to walk over the marsh or to put a platform over so the marsh doesn't get walked on. That I would hope is a unique situation in this case, and that it won't affect other illegalities that we find, and so that we won't have to, somebody won't be able to use this necessarily as a precedent. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
Well, there is the agencies typically permit these kinds of things.
Well, we're looking at, I think we're looking positively at an application for a walkway over a marsh in Fremont Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
That we're waiting for the DEC to weigh in on first. We're waiting for the ZBA to weigh in on first. There's another one of those cases of who comes first, but.
Yeah, well, but that one there was predominantly not over our water body.
When you put something over,
Maybe not predominantly, but we are claiming that we do have jurisdiction in that marsh.
Okay.
John, when you put something over a salt marsh to get to the water, that structure, whether it's a board structure, a walkway of any kind, or a metal structure. You now are eliminating, excuse me, you're eliminating the light. You're basically smothering what's underneath, and that dies.
Not necessarily, Susan. That's why the DEC now, and then I believe the town CBA as well, requires, the surface to be a grate that light will penetrate through.
Well, you and I both know of a property that has walkway on the marsh, and it is, there's nothing underneath it because there's no light that gets through, and it is essentially gone, the natural growth that's underneath there.
And the condition would be the same on this, of it removed seasonally. At the end of the season, it would be removed. It wouldn't go back in until sometime in the spring, like it had been done before. We've looked at the old areas. When there was nothing there, you could actually see it and actually scale off and count the pieces where they were stacked. Actually, farther upland in the marsh.
Further upland on top of the marsh.
On top of the marsh. But everybody seemed to be
Well, I
doing
think
all right.
they were stored on the property, on that person's property,
Yeah.
off the reserve.
Well, hopefully they were all.
But they were still
when you
on
look at those areas, it doesn't quite look like it. It looks like they were in the reserve part of some of the time.
Yeah.
I guess.
Anyway, the night's getting old here. Are we going to table this for the next meeting?
Yes.
I personally would like to see us get to some resolution on this.
Well, I would like to see Chris have the opportunity to talk to John. Got a call in so long as John said he would speak to you next week.
This week, yeah.
What, John, would you repeat what you just said? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
And I would like for Chris to have the opportunity to speak with John Jilnicki about this, which he has a call in, John.
Okay, so we're going to table it tonight, but we're going to take action at the next meeting. Okay. All right, let's move on. Committee report, Georgia. Request from First Coastal on behalf of the Georgia Code Association. Suffolk County Tax Map 300-200-3-7. Renew trustee permit Phragmites number 12-22 for the selected cutting of Phragmites.
Okay, I met with the applicant's agent excuse me. I met with the applicant's agent this past week to look at the area. This area has been cut before, and actually it was a great example of if you can discipline yourself to cut on some frequency as to how natural recruitment can bring back this meadow area. It was actually dominated by native vegetation, whereas a few years ago it was more or less dominated by Phragmites. The applicant proposes to go in and selectively hand cut the Phragmites, the emergent Phragmites that you see there. There are some other non-native invasives there. There's mile a minute, which I didn't see a problem with them hand removal of the mile a minute while they were in there.
Where is this property?
This is where they launched the beetle boats, and they're in George Capone.
What's this? A while ago, maybe last season?
Last winter.
What's the story there?
The story was, I think somebody stepped out of the conditions of the permit slightly, but at the end of the day,
Wasn't it characterized as sort of a clear cut?
It was, but I think that was an exaggeration because nothing was killed in the process here. And what you had a tremendous amount of wrack in the form of old tires, old kayaks, debris, crap that had washed in there over storms, What they did is they did their cutback, they removed the debris, and yes, it looked like a haircut from Vinnie's.
Wasn't it well into the upland as well?
Went right to the road.
A lot of people go to that.
Okay,
What was the permit?
the permit was for cutting the Phragmites. We only issued a permit for cutting the Phragmites.
Who issued the permit?
The
for
town,
other
they
stuff?
have a cutting permit from the town, which is still in place, and they have a cutting permit from the DEC.
What was the outcome of that? I mean, the town had
Nothing.
problems.
Nothing. At the end of the day, it does not appear that anybody took any real action here. And if you go down there, and I encourage anybody here to get down there and look at that, it looks great, with the exception, you've got some Phragmites still coming up in the area. Stay on top of it, keep cutting it. But you've got marshmallow in there, you've got blue vervain in there, you got iris in there, you've got all kinds of some young tupelo trees that are emerging in the area. It is a good example of a recovering marsh area. And I would like to make a proposal that we just renew this permit.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
One thing that did happen here is the contractor that did the cutting earlier this past year, that was the problematic issue, is not the same contractor.
They have the permit. I mean, the Phragmite, is our permit really only in trustee jurisdiction?
Only the emergent stuff is really the trustee.
And do they have a permit
Yes,
to continue
all of
cutting
the,
upland tract?
yes. And there's nothing that they're cutting. In fact, the area right along the road, I encourage them to go back and get some modifications on it, because as you get up in the areas along the road, you've got mugwort, you've got a little bit of Japanese knotweed there, and some other stuff that doesn't belong there. But for the most part, it's dominated by nice, healthy native vegetation, devoid of the garbage and the debris that was there before.
Who seconded the motion after Jim?
David,
David, thank you.
And then if we're on subject of marshes and stuff, we did have a pretty decent brush fire on Napeat Harbor last Friday night. It went into Saturday. I didn't. One of the other firemen did. But it was a little like a scene from Apocalypse Now. We had a helicopter down there. It consumed about, I think it was probably about 30 or 40 acres.
Wasn't there any houses? So
No, actually, the only real threat was, is it backing to the east? If it had made it around Fresh Pond, could potentially have continued burning through Hither Woods.
This is good weather we're having. It's a shame we didn't get as much of a storm today.
yeah, felt like it.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see that area. And again, when you saw that whole area burned, what kept it burning the next day? All the logs and crap that had blown in there over storms that were mostly decomposed. That once they started burning, they were burning underground, and that's what perpetuated the fire.
Yeah, this wasn't actually on the harbor, was it?
Yes,
this is.
I thought it was right there.
John,
it was up at the northeast corner, just before you get to where they've got the barge and stuff for the aquaculture.
how do they think it started?
It hadn't been in case somebody dropped a cigarette or something. Because usually those fires are kind of connected to the railroad tracks somehow, not even close.
Yeah, this could have, it's getting scary, with this hot weather and all the dead pine trees.
Well, what's amazing is typically you don't get much of a brush fire with the humidity that we had. Usually they'll burn and they'll kind of burn themselves out fairly quickly. This thing was raging,
Had some pretty good winds
Yeah.
at times. Yeah.
And then it started back up today a little bit.
Did it again?
Yeah.
Is this, what do you keep somebody watching it?
I'll tell you what, you know what? Say whatever you want about the state park guys. They did a tremendous job down there. They had a really good crew. They were incredibly helpful to the firemen. They were bringing water into guys. They were showing people how to get to places because, you know, it's been so many years since we've had fires out in those areas. A lot of people forgot how you got to some of those spots.
I was gonna say, how many, you must have had trucks from a lot of different departments to get
We ended up
trucks that could make
Friday.
it down there.
No, we had no trucks make it in there. We had Bridgehampton's brush truck, East Hampton's brush truck, Sag Harbor's brush truck, Montauk's brush truck. They all came down by that paved lot by water fence there. And figured, remember that old road that went on the backside of dunes? Because the beach was so soft.
Yeah.
You couldn't get down the beach. None of those trucks made it to the fire because you know what? You didn't realize just how freaking far it was. So the guys that made it in there were a couple of guys went down the beach by water fence towards Golf Point on the beach. And most of the guys got in through just running along the shore in that Peak Harbor.
So Jim, you had mostly a southwest wind, which
Yeah.
I guess would keep it sort of parallel to the shoreline, but like tonight a dry northwest, would that potentially ignite it and kick it back inland?
It could have, yeah.
So maybe the southwest is probably, even though it was gusty, better than a northwest in that location.
You know, and the approach we took is we only tried to extinguish the easterly side of the fire. The west side of the fire, we were perfectly content to let it burn back to the harbor.
Well, I mean, they've been doing selective burns out there. Have they done any?
Just not in friggin' 30 years. Not in 30 years have they done.
Have they done, are they doing some out there? Weren't they
They're doing it
some?
farther up the island. They have not done a selective burn out here since, Christ, I think it's back in the
Weren't they
90s.
doing something east?
Yeah.
Were they doing anything east of Lake Montauk?
Yeah, Oyster and Reed Pond. But they haven't done that since the 90s.
Yeah, I don't know. Have the pine beetles gone through that yet, or they just on their way?
Pine beetles have gone through Napeet pretty good. There's pockets that have been totally killed off and what would worry. I was talking to the forest ranger that I worked with back in the 90s. We were working on the controlled burns out there. And the DEC, this is one of the small benefits of something like the southern pine bark beetle. It has gotten the state and county back talking about memorandums of understanding between the two agencies to allow the controlled burns. Because that was always the thing that stopped the controlled burns, is you could not get the county and the state to agree to like cross indemnify each other in the event something went wrong. When the state agreed to it, the county would not. When the county would agree to it, the state would not. They had these catch-22s of we have no manpower. Well, why don't you train your volunteer firemen? They're perfectly willing to do this.
Yeah.
Well, we can do that, but they can't participate in a controlled burn until they have experience. Okay, how are you going to get experience if you don't have the guys participate? I went to meetings for months on that stuff, and it was like as frustrating as talking about that dock.
All right, let's move on. It's getting late. We have an application from Ackerman on behalf of Farmhouse One LLC.
Yeah, this is the little cottage, the historic boathouse at the old Kelly Klein property. And what they are looking to do there is do interior, it looked like mostly renovations on that. No water. It looked like the scope of the work was redoing the electric, redoing some of the interior components. No water, no septic, just really what was there. I didn't see it as anything different than what they already have.
They have plans drawn up?
Yeah, they've got a whole set of plans. We have them at the office.
Okay.
Then I'll think if
You're gonna
you
make
want,
a resolution to,
I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
I'll second that.
There's no expansion, no change to the building.
Okay, motion by Jim, second by John, all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. County Estuary Partnership, Local Government Committee update.
Well, I put these things on the agenda when there was nothing on the agenda, so I'll make these quick now that they had a lot of other things to the agenda that have taken up a lot of time. The Local Government Committee, I've never really been to one of these before, so I decided to just listen in. And it was really was just a laundry list of different grant opportunities that the DEP is putting together for local governments to consider for projects. And it was a little bit mind-numbing to hear the different, grants from the different jurisdictions. But the one takeaway I got from it was the staff of the PEP did ask different municipalities, towns, and villages to come up with 3 projects to submit back to the PEP that they wanted to undertake, and the PEP would help, try to tailor the project to a grant, some of the grant opportunities that would be most applicable for funding. So I got a call into the person from the PEP to ask them. But we have 2 projects, the Nappy East Inlet and the Acabonic Marsh Restoration Project, that are already sort of priority projects in the Habitat Restoration Plan. But I have a call into her to ask if, those would be 2 of the projects. Is this like any more help we're going to get, or should we come up with 3 other projects? But I just throw that out to the board to think about projects that might, in addition to those 2 that we might want to undertake and look for funding for. Maybe we could submit them as.
I would love to see them submitted, because my concern with adding like three new projects, I think both of those are really worthwhile projects that should be prioritized.
And how much money are they talking about today?
All the different grant possibilities have all kinds of different, amounts associated with. Some are up to $1 million, some are up to $250,000, some are, $5,000.
There is a link that they sent out. I was not able to attend that meeting, but there's a link if you'd like me to forward it to you of the meeting, so you could see it in its entirety. Would anybody like it?
I already have it.
Yeah, I've got it too.
Okay. Thank you, John, for covering that.
Sure. So that's it for that.
And aquaculture, we have an update on the hatcheries pilot kelp program.
Oh, well, I just, we had a little question about the remaining buoys in Acabonic Harbor, so I had a chance to talk to Barley about it, and I, asked him about how the project's going in general. So it's, he's completed the first year of growth. All the lines are out. All that's left in the water now are the auger anchors that are screwed into the bottom, and they have, just small buoys marking them.
Well, that answers our question.
We saw them on Friday?
Yes, we did.
Friday.
How was the growth?
Well, the growth in that location and in my shipyard was pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. Head of the harbor wasn't good at all. They had an excess string with the spores attached to it that they didn't have, use for, but they just hung off the dock, kind of forgot about at Gann Road, and that grew amazing. I mean, I saw it, it's like trailing out into the deep water, so. They're going to redeploy strings in the late fall again, and they may forego the head of the harbor location, is my understanding. I may not be.
That's the one down by SoCon.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't seem like this. Is it too much fresh water there?
I don't know, I don't know what the needs of the competing are, but they seem, traditionally they want a little cooler and they want some wave action and motion, and they are kind of an ocean.
See, what Gann Road always has that current that's coming through there.
That'll do it. They want the flow.
Right up against the bulkhead.
I mean, the current comes in there,
Yeah.
goes right along that bulkhead, not out again.
Steeper than.
Is that Mike?
I said, it's all about that flow.
Yeah. So, and none of the sites have really great flow that they tried. I don't believe they did anyway.
Yes, quite.
But, the Accabonac shipyard site was one of their better results.
Maybe just past Dayton's Island there might be. Just past the shallow thing, might get a nice flow in there.
Could be, yeah, could be. Might have to dodge the boats, so.
No, I mean, if you put it on the other side of the shoal.
You have to go way forward. That shoal is very shallow.
No, but I mean, it goes long, but it's not that wide. You're on the back side of it.
Right.
You're on the back side of it, a couple hundred yards off the end of Dayton Island. You might have the harbor just starts to open up.
Right.
Oh, yeah, they'll keep flying in places.
Right, thanks. Move on to payment of the bills. We have Optimum, $167.12 for the monthly bill. Montauk Marine Basin, $1,421.08 for gas. East Hampton Marina, $134.35 for gas, and $232.60 for gas. The other motion to pay the bills.
Make a motion to pay the bills.
All in favor?
Aye.
With some change in our fuel costs.
Yeah, what is that going for on the?
It was around 9 or 10 a gallon earlier in the season. I don't know what it is now. I can check though if you'd like.
There's a lot of boats for sale. Yeah.
All right, we have no minutes to review. I have nothing before the clerk. Does anybody have anything? We'll say goodnight.
Make a motion close.
Good night.
All in favor? Good night, guys. Good night, Susan.
I'm sorry.
Feel better?
Well, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bill.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Good night,
Okay,
Matt.
We're done.
Done.